The large concert hall was glowing with golden lights that reflected off the shiny surface of the grand piano, sitting at the center of the stage. People were moving around, talking softly, waiting for the next performer to arrive. In the middle of this elegant space walked a young boy, no more than 12, with curly hair and clothes that looked a bit too old for him. His name was Leo. Leo's small footsteps echoed as he entered the hall. He carried no fancy case or badge, nothing that made him look like a performer. He just stood there, his eyes wide with admiration as he looked at the huge black piano. It looked almost magical to him, its keys shining under the bright lights like stars laid out in perfect order. The manager of the hall, Mr. Harris, noticed the boy standing near the stage. He was a tall man in a crisp suit, proud of how well he kept this concert hall running. Mr. Harris frowned slightly. Children were not supposed to wander near the instruments. "Hey, kid," he called out in a slightly annoyed tone. "What are you doing there?" Leo turned around quickly, startled. "Sir, may I play the piano? Just for a minute?" he asked softly, his voice almost shaking. Mr. Harris blinked, thinking he had heard wrong. "Play? You? This piano?" He laughed loudly, and a few people nearby looked up, curious about what was happening. Leo nodded, his eyes shining with quiet hope. "Please, just once," he said. The manager couldn't believe the boy's courage. He looked at Leo's worn-out jeans and old shoes. Clearly, this boy wasn't from a rich family or a music academy. He didn't even look like he belonged in this fancy place. Mr. Harris laughed again, but this time with a bit of arrogance. "Oh, you can play, can you?" he said, crossing his arms. "You know what? If you can play this piano well, I'll kneel right here in front of everyone." People nearby chuckled. A few whispered things like, "Poor kid, he'll embarrass himself." Others smiled, waiting to see what would happen next. Leo's heart pounded. He looked down at his hands and took a deep breath. He had played many pianos before, but never one so grand or so perfect. This was the kind of piano his mother once told him about, the kind that only great musicians played. Still, Leo didn't step back. He looked at Mr. Harris again, then at the piano. Something inside him whispered, "This is your chance." The manager smirked. "Well, are you waiting for permission, little Mozart?" he said sarcastically. "Go ahead. Show us what you've got." Leo slowly climbed onto the small stage. His shoes made soft tapping sounds on the wooden floor. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he kept walking until he reached the piano. His fingers brushed against its smooth surface, and for a moment, he forgot everyone was watching. He pulled the bench closer and sat down. The hall grew quiet. Even the soft murmurs stopped. Everyone waited, half expecting the boy to make a fool of himself. Leo placed his small fingers over the keys but didn't press them yet. He closed his eyes. In his mind, he could hear his mother's voice saying, "Play with your heart, not your hands." That was what his teacher used to tell him too. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Mr. Harris began to grow impatient. He folded his arms and said under his breath, "He's scared now." But Leo wasn't scared. He was remembering the cold evenings when he practiced on an old keyboard with broken keys. Remembering how his teacher told him that real music doesn't come from the fingers, it comes from the soul. When he finally pressed the first note, it rang clear and strong through the hall. The sound surprised everyone. It was pure, confident, and full of feeling. Mr. Harris's smile faded slightly. Leo pressed another key and another, and soon a melody began to flow. Each note seemed to dance through the air, wrapping around the hall like a gentle wave. The people who had been laughing were now silent, their eyes fixed on the small boy whose fingers were moving faster and faster. Mr. Harris felt something strange, a chill running down his arms. The boy's hands moved with a kind of beauty he had only seen from professional pianists. But how could this be? When Leo finished his short piece, his fingers rested on the keys for a moment. He didn't look up immediately. He just sat there, breathing slowly. The hall stayed silent. No one clapped, not because they didn't want to, but because they were too shocked to react. Mr. Harris's jaw tightened. He felt a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. The boy finally looked up, his innocent eyes meeting the manager's. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. "That's all I wanted." Mr. Harris didn't speak. He just stared at the boy, realizing that his laughter might have been the biggest mistake of the day. In that single moment, the air in the room changed. It was no longer about a child asking for permission. It was about talent being seen for the first time. And though Leo didn't know it yet, that one performance would change his life forever. The challenge had been made, and it had just begun to turn into something much bigger, a story that no one in that room would ever forget. The last note from Leo's piano still floated in the air, soft but powerful. The audience inside the hall stayed frozen like a photograph. No one moved, no one clapped. They had just seen something they didn't expect. A young boy dressed in ordinary clothes playing like a master. Mr. Harris, the manager, still stood near the stage, his mouth slightly open. A minute ago he had been laughing. Now he was quiet, his face pale and confused. He wasn't the only one. Around him, several people began to whisper to each other in disbelief. "Who is that kid?" someone murmured. "He's incredible," said another voice. "No, it can't be real. He's too young." The curiosity spread like a wave. People who had been waiting for the professional performers now turned all their attention to Leo. He sat silently on the piano bench, his hands still resting on the keys, unsure if he should get up or play again. His heart was still beating fast, but there was a strange calm in his chest, the kind that only music could bring. Among the people watching was a woman in a black dress sitting near the front. She was a piano teacher who had spent years training students. When she heard Leo play, her eyes widened in shock. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his hands. His technique is perfect, she thought. He's not guessing his way through this, he knows exactly what he's doing. But others in the room didn't know how to react. Some whispered that maybe it was luck, or that he had memorized just one piece. A few smiled, pretending not to be impressed. Yet deep inside, everyone felt something shift. Leo slowly turned his head and looked at the crowd. The faces staring back were a mix of amazement and confusion. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. He wasn't used to attention. He wasn't used to applause or even kindness from strangers. Mr. Harris finally cleared his throat and said awkwardly, "That was unexpected." His voice echoed awkwardly in the quiet hall. He had promised to kneel if the boy played well, but part of him hoped people had forgotten that. Unfortunately for him, they hadn't. Someone from the audience chuckled softly and whispered loud enough for others to hear. He said he'd kneel. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, not at Leo this time, but at the manager. Mr. Harris's cheeks flushed. He adjusted his tie, trying to look in control. All right, he said quickly, trying to change the subject. "Young man, where did you learn to play like that?" Leo looked at him, unsure if it was a real question or another test. "At home," he said quietly. "Home?" The manager repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Who taught you?" "My mother helped me when I was small," Leo answered, his eyes lowering for a moment. "And a teacher before he moved away." The piano teacher in the audience leaned closer, whispering to herself. "Moved away? He must mean Maestro Gianni." She had heard of the famous Italian pianist who had disappeared from the public stage years ago. Could it be possible that this boy had learned from him? Before anyone could ask more, Leo looked back at the piano. "May I play one more?" he asked softly. Mr. Harris hesitated. The hall wasn't supposed to be open for random performances, but everyone's eyes were on him, waiting. He finally sighed and waved his hand. "Go on then, kid. Let's see what else you've got." Leo nodded once. He closed his eyes again and placed his hands gently on the keys. This time he didn't think about the crowd or the manager or even his fear. He thought about his mother, how she used to hum while cleaning the hall after the concerts, how she told him that music could heal even the hardest hearts. When the first notes began, the sound was softer, more emotional than before. It wasn't just a display of skill, it was storytelling through music. Each note carried warmth, sorrow, and something unexplainably beautiful. The audience sat absolutely still. An elderly man near the back wiped his eyes quietly. The melody reminded him of his late wife, who used to play piano when they were young. A little girl sitting beside her mother clapped her hands together softly, whispering, "He plays like magic." Even Mr. Harris felt something deep in his chest. The same man who laughed minutes ago now felt his throat tighten. He had worked in this hall for 20 years, heard world-famous musicians perform, but none of them had ever made him feel this way. When Leo reached the end, he let the final note fade naturally into silence. The hall felt heavier somehow, filled not with sound but with emotion. He looked up again, uncertain, almost shy, and then it happened. Someone began to clap. Just one person at first, then another, then just one person at first, then another, until the entire hall was applauding. The sound grew louder and louder, filling the room like thunder. Leo's eyes widened. He had never heard applause like this before. It wasn't polite clapping, it was genuine. People were smiling, some standing, others whistling. The piano teacher even shouted, "Bravo!" Leo stood slowly, unsure what to do with all that attention. He looked at Mr. Harris, who was still frozen, his promise echoing in his mind. "If you play hard piano, I'll kneel right here." The manager sighed deeply, half smiling now, half humbled. The boy had done more than just play hard. He had played with a heart bigger than the hall itself. And as the crowd continued to cheer, Leo realized something for the first time. This was not just about music. This was about being seen, about proving that even someone small, quiet, and ordinary could hold a room full of strangers spellbound, with nothing but honesty and sound. The whispers grew louder, the curiosity turning into admiration. The boy who had walked in alone had just captured everyone's hearts. And though Leo didn't know it yet, the real story, the one that would change everything, was only beginning. The hall was still buzzing from the applause, but Leo sat quietly on the piano bench. He didn't know how to react to all the clapping, the smiling faces, or the surprise that had filled the air. For the first time in his life, people were not laughing at him. They were looking at him with admiration. But as the noise began to fade, something else filled the room. A heavy silence, thick with expectation. Everyone wanted to hear more. Leo glanced up nervously. Mr. Harris was still standing by the stage, his face unreadable. The man's earlier pride seemed to have melted away, replaced with something like curiosity, maybe even guilt. He gave Leo a small nod, the kind that said, "Go on." Leo turned back to the piano. His heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was excitement. He gently pressed one key just to feel the sound again. The note rang out pure and bright, floating across the hall like a drop of water falling into a still pond. That one sound reminded him why he loved music so much. When Leo was younger, his mother used to sit beside him on the floor of their small apartment while he practiced on an old second-hand keyboard. The keys were yellowed and half of them didn't even work properly, but Leo never complained. To him, every sound, no matter how broken, was a step closer to his dream. His mother would hum softly while cleaning, saying, "One day, Leo, you'll play on a real piano in a real hall. Just don't stop believing." That memory flickered in his mind now as he sat before the grand piano. He whispered under his breath, "This one's for you, Mom." Then he began to play. The first few notes were slow, delicate, and full of emotion. Each sound seemed to tell a story of small dreams, long nights, and quiet strength. The melody rose gently, like a bird spreading its wings after a long rest. People in the audience leaned forward in their seats. Some closed their eyes just listening. The tone of the piano was so warm, so human, that it almost felt like the music itself was breathing. Mr. Harris found himself sitting down in the front row without realizing it. The boy's playing pulled him in like a tide. His earlier laughter now felt foolish. Every note that came from Leo's hands seemed to strike straight at his heart. Leo's fingers moved faster now, confident and free. He was no longer just a boy playing the piano. He was a storyteller. The rhythm danced and swayed, echoing through every corner of the hall. The audience was silent, spellbound. Even the air seemed to pause to listen, and then suddenly the music changed. The melody grew deeper, richer, almost painful. Leo's eyes were half closed, lost in the memory of his mother's tired hands, her soft smile. He could almost see her standing in the crowd watching him, proud and peaceful. His fingers pressed harder against the keys, the sound growing stronger. It was as if every emotion he had ever hidden, loneliness, love, longing, was pouring out through the piano. The audience felt it too. Some people wiped their eyes quietly. A man near the back whispered to his wife, "That boy. He's playing his life." For a few minutes, time seemed to stop. There was only music, no stage, no audience, no difference between the boy and the piano. They were one. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the storm of sound softened again. Leo's hands slowed, his touch becoming feather-light. The melody drifted down, calmer and calmer, until it faded into a single lingering note. He let it hang in the air before lifting his fingers. Silence. For a moment, no one breathed. It was as if the whole hall was afraid to break the spell. Then someone in the back whispered, "My God." The whisper spread, and within seconds the hall exploded into applause once more, louder than before. People stood up clapping, cheering, shouting bravo, and amazing. Leo blinked, overwhelmed. He had never seen so many smiling faces at once. Mr. Harris was still sitting, his hands frozen mid-clap. A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that comes from being humbled. He remembered his own words, "If you play hard piano, I'll kneel right here," and suddenly felt his throat tighten. The boy looked at him again, innocent and unsure, as if asking, "Was it enough?" Mr. Harris stood slowly and nodded, his eyes softening. "More than enough," he said quietly, almost to himself. The audience was still clapping when Leo got up from the piano bench. He gave a small bow, shyly, and smiled for the first time that evening. His curls bounced slightly as he looked around, his eyes shining under the warm lights. A woman near the front row whispered to another, "He's not just talented. He's gifted. That's pure soul." Leo didn't know about gifts or talent. All he knew was that for the first time his music had reached hearts. It wasn't about fame or money, it was about connection. As he walked off the stage, Mr. Harris approached him quietly. "Kid," he said, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly, "you really showed me something today." Leo smiled politely. "Thank you, sir." The manager looked at the piano, then back at Leo. "You know, not many people can make that piano sing. You just did." Leo looked down, embarrassed. "It's not the piano," he said softly. "It's the feeling." Mr. Harris blinked, surprised by the boy's words. He realized that this wasn't just a talented kid. This was someone special. Someone who carried music inside his soul. As Leo left the stage, the crowd continued to cheer, but he didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He had already heard what he came for. The sound of hearts clapping louder than hands. And deep inside, he knew. This was only the first note of a much bigger song. The applause slowly faded, but its echo stayed in everyone's hearts. Leo stepped down from the stage, his small hand still trembling slightly. He had just done something extraordinary, yet he didn't feel proud, he felt peaceful. For him, playing wasn't about showing off. It was about feeling alive. Mr. Harris watched the boy quietly. He had seen hundreds of performers in his years managing the hall, famous pianists, trained musicians, even celebrities. But this child had something different, something raw and powerful. It wasn't just skill. It was truth. As Leo walked toward the corner of the hall, an older woman with silver hair approached him. She had been sitting in the audience, her eyes locked on him the entire time. She carried a small leather bag and a notebook full of music sheets. "Young man," she said kindly, "that was remarkable. Who taught you to play like that?" Leo looked up at her politely. "My teacher, but he doesn't teach anymore," he said softly. "Oh?" she asked, curious. "What's his name?" Leo hesitated. He had promised not to talk much about his teacher, but something inside told him it was okay. "Maestro Gianni," he said finally. The woman gasped quietly. "Gianni, the Maestro Gianni?" She whispered in disbelief. Her eyes widened as she placed a hand over her mouth. People nearby turned to listen. Mr. Harris, still standing by the stage, frowned slightly. "Who's that?" he asked. The woman turned toward him. "You don't know? Maestro Gianni was one of the most gifted pianists in Europe. He disappeared years ago, stopped performing after a terrible accident." She looked back at Leo. "You were his student?" Leo nodded. "He lived near our building. My mom used to clean his house. When he found out I loved music, he started teaching me. He said music should come from the heart, not from fame." The room fell silent again, but it wasn't awkward, it was awe. People listened as the boy spoke, his words simple yet full of honesty. Mr. Harris's voice softened. "So he taught you everything?" Leo smiled faintly. "He said he was just showing me the door. The rest was up to me." The old woman's eyes glistened. "Then you must have been his last student," she whispered. "He must have seen something special in you." Leo nodded slowly, remembering the long afternoons in Maestro Gianni's small apartment. The old man's hands had been thin and weak from the accident, but when they touched the piano, they still danced with grace. Leo could still hear his teacher's voice. "Don't play to impress, Leo, play to express." The audience should not hear your notes, they should feel your heart. Those lessons were worth more than any fame or money. They became Leo's secret treasure. Every time he played, he tried to live up to those words. Why did he stop performing? Someone from the crowd asked softly. Leo looked down. He hurt his hand in a car accident. He couldn't play anymore. But he said if I ever got the chance to play on a real stage, I should do it for both of us. A hush fell over the hall. Even Mr. Harris felt a lump in his throat. The boy wasn't chasing glory. He was fulfilling someone else's dream. After a few seconds, Mr. Harris finally spoke. Your teacher would be proud, kid. You've done more than play, you've brought life into this hall. Leo smiled shyly. He always said music doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. The piano teacher who had been watching earlier stepped forward too. He's right, she said softly. That's what most players forget. She looked at Leo. Do you know what you did today? You reminded people why music exists. The crowd murmured in agreement. Some were still emotional from the performance, others from the story behind it. Leo shifted nervously, not used to so much attention. I just wanted to play once here, he said honestly. My mom told me this hall had the most beautiful sound. Mr. Harris's eyes widened a little. Wait, your mom? Leo nodded. She used to clean this hall at night. She said the piano sounds different here, like it's alive. A deep silence followed those words. The truth hit Mr. Harris hard. The boy who had just moved everyone's hearts wasn't a guest or a performer. He was the son of one of the cleaners who worked behind the scenes. Suddenly, all his earlier arrogance felt shameful. He remembered laughing at Leo, mocking his dream, not realizing who he was or what he carried inside. He swallowed hard and said softly, Your mother was right, Leo. The piano is alive, especially when you play it. Leo looked up and smiled gently. She always said sound doesn't care who makes it, it just wants to be heard. The audience clapped again, not loudly this time, but warmly. It wasn't just applause for his music, it was respect for his spirit. Mr. Harris felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. A deep, genuine admiration. He took a small step forward. Leo, he said quietly, I made a promise before you played. I said I'd kneel if you could play hard piano. He paused, then added softly, But what you did was more than hard. You played with soul. The boy shook his head gently. Please, sir, you don't have to. But before he could finish, Mr. Harris slowly bent down on one knee, right there in front of everyone. Gasps filled the hall, followed by a long silence. The man who had once mocked the boy now bowed in front of him, humbled by truth. Leo didn't smile or gloat. He simply whispered, Thank you. And in that moment, something powerful happened, not just between a man and a boy, but between pride and humility, arrogance and art, judgment and grace. The boy who came from nothing had reminded everyone that true greatness has no uniform, no title, no age. It only needs a heart willing to play. Mr. Harris stayed there on one knee, the polished floor reflecting both his bent figure and the boy standing quietly in front of him. The applause that had filled the hall a few moments ago now turned into a warm silence. No one moved. Everyone seemed to understand that something rare and beautiful had just happened. Leo looked down at the manager, unsure what to do. He didn't like seeing anyone kneel for him. He had grown up watching his mother bow her head while cleaning floors like this one. He knew what humility looked like, and he didn't want anyone to feel small because of him. Please, sir, he whispered softly. You don't have to kneel. I'm just a boy who loves music. Mr. Harris slowly stood up, straightening his jacket. His eyes were moist, though he tried to hide it with a small laugh. No, Leo, he said, his voice shaking slightly. You're not just a boy. You're a reminder of everything I forgot about music. Those words hung in the air, heavy and honest. The crowd fell silent again, waiting for what would happen next. Mr. Harris looked around the hall, the red velvet seats, the shining chandeliers, the golden lights that had always made him feel proud of managing this grand place. But for the first time, he realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening. He had spent years worrying about rules, appearances, ticket sales, and famous names. He had forgotten that music was not about prestige, it was about passion. He turned toward Leo again. Do you know, kid? He said quietly. I've worked here for 20 years. I've seen pianists from all over the world perform here. But today, for the first time, I actually felt something again. Leo smiled shyly. It's the piano, he said, as if that explained everything. Mr. Harris chuckled softly. No, it's not the piano. It's you. The boy looked confused. Me? Yes, the manager said, taking a step closer. That piano has been sitting here for decades. Thousands have played it, but today it sounded alive. You didn't just press the keys, you spoke through them. The crowd murmured in agreement. The old woman who had recognized Maestro Gianni nodded slowly, her eyes shining. He's right, she said. The boy doesn't play notes, he tells stories. Mr. Harris exhaled deeply and ran a hand over his face. When you walked in earlier, Leo, he said, I saw a kid with old clothes and big dreams. I judged you without even knowing who you were. I laughed because I thought you didn't belong here. He paused, his voice softening. But you did. You belonged more than anyone. Leo blinked, unsure how to respond. My mom always said people only see what they want to see, he said quietly. But music, it makes them see what's real. Those words hit Mr. Harris like a wave. He felt something heavy inside him, guilt, but also gratitude. The boy had not only reminded him what music truly was, he had also shown him what humility looked like. Your mother was a wise woman, Mr. Harris said. Leo nodded. She said the world can be noisy, but music teaches you how to listen. The hall was utterly silent now. Everyone listened to every word, feeling as if they were witnessing something bigger than a concert. Mr. Harris walked to the piano and placed his hand gently on it. You know, he said, his voice thoughtful, this piano has been played by some of the greatest, but I don't think it's ever been this proud. Leo tilted his head, smiling softly. That's because it likes being heard by kind people. The manager laughed quietly, shaking his head. You talk like an old soul, kid. Leo shrugged. That's what my teacher said too. He said old souls don't need fancy things, they just need time and a piano. A gentle laughter rolled through the audience, lightening the atmosphere. But even in the smiles, the respect was clear. Everyone knew they had just seen something unforgettable. Mr. Harris turned toward the audience and said, Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just discovered a true artist tonight. Not because of his skill, but because of his heart. The audience erupted in applause again, this time standing on their feet. People clapped, whistled, and shouted his name. Leo, Leo! The boy blushed and looked down, his cheeks red. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He looked around, almost as if searching for his mother among the crowd. But she wasn't there. She was probably at home, tired after another long day of work. That thought filled his eyes with a soft sadness. He wished she could have seen this moment. He wished she could have known that her son had played in the same hall she had cleaned every night. Mr. Harris noticed the boy's quiet expression and leaned down. You know, he said kindly, if your mom worked here, that makes this place part of your story too. Leo looked up, surprised. Really? Really, Mr. Harris said with a smile. And I think she'd be proud to know that her son filled this place with something it hasn't had in years. Real emotion. The audience clapped again, not just for the boy, but for his mother, for the teacher who believed in him, and for the reminder that greatness can come from anywhere. As Leo stood there, soaking in the warmth around him, Mr. Harris extended his hand. Would you like to come back tomorrow, Leo? We've got an open rehearsal slot. I think the world deserves to hear you. Leo's eyes lit up. Can I really? The manager smiled. You can. No promises, no jokes, just music. Leo nodded eagerly, his heart racing with joy. For the first time, someone powerful wasn't laughing at him. They were believing in him. As the hall slowly emptied and the lights dimmed, Leo looked back at the grand piano one last time. Its surface gleamed softly under the golden light. And for a moment, he could almost hear his teacher's voice whisper again. Play to express. Leo, not to impress. He smiled to himself and whispered back, I did, Maestro. I really did. The audience had started to leave, but the story inside the hall wasn't over yet. The soft golden light still shimmered on the stage, and the grand piano stood proudly under its warm glow, silent, yet full of life after the music it had just carried. Leo stood near the piano, his small hands brushing lightly across the smooth surface. He could still feel the vibration of the last note he played. His heart was full, but his mind was quiet. The applause had been beautiful, but that wasn't what mattered most to him. What mattered was that he had played from his soul, just like his teacher had taught him. Mr. Harris was still nearby, standing silently. His earlier pride and sharpness had melted into something softer, respect. He had spent most of his career organizing performances, managing artists, and ensuring perfection. But this little boy had done something none of those great musicians ever did. He had made him feel. The last few people in the audience lingered, whispering about the boy and the way he played. The old woman who had recognized Maestro Gianni wiped her tears quietly. She whispered to another teacher beside her, "I haven't felt this kind of emotion in music for years. I haven't felt this kind of emotion in music for years." The manager looked at him, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Not yet, Leo. There's something I owe you." Leo tilted his head, confused. "Owe me?" Mr. Harris took a slow step toward the piano. "Do you remember what I said before you played?" Leo blinked and thought for a second. "You said, 'If I play hard piano, you'll kneel right here,'" he said honestly. A quiet laugh rippled through the hall from the few people who were still there. Mr. Harris smiled too, but it was a humble, thoughtful smile. "I did say that," he said softly, "and I meant it as a joke back then. I thought you'd play a few random notes, maybe make people laugh. But you didn't just play hard, you played with heart. And a man should always keep his word." Leo's eyes widened. "You don't have to, sir," he said quickly. "You already said nice things." "That's enough," but Mr. Harris shook his head. "No, Leo, you taught me something today. I have to keep my promise, not because you demand it, but because you earned it." Then, without another word, the hall manager, dressed in his crisp suit, the same man who once laughed at the boy, took a deep breath, stepped in front of the piano, and slowly went down on one knee. The few people left gasped quietly. The sound of his knee touching the wooden floor echoed faintly in the vast hall. Leo froze, completely speechless. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Mr. Harris looked up at him, his eyes soft but sincere. "Forgive me for judging you by your clothes, your age, or your silence," he said. "You showed me what real music and real humility looks like. I don't kneel because I lost a bet. I kneel because I respect you." Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. He wasn't used to grown-ups speaking to him like that. For so long, people had ignored him or smiled politely before turning away. No one ever truly saw him. But now this man, this important manager, was kneeling in front of him, not because of pity, but because of honor. The piano teacher in the audience clasped her hands together, whispering, "Beautiful, just beautiful." Leo's lips trembled. "Sir, please stand up," he said gently. "I don't like people bowing. My mom always said everyone stands on the same ground." Mr. Harris smiled and nodded. "Your mother is a wise woman," he said softly, rising slowly to his feet. "You're lucky to have her." Leo nodded proudly. "Yes, sir. She's the best person I know." Mr. Harris looked around the hall once more, then turned back to the boy. "You know, Leo," he said thoughtfully, "I've heard people play this piano for fame, money, or applause. But you played for something purer, something the world forgets sometimes." Leo blinked. "What's that?" "Love," Mr. Harris said simply. "You played because you love it." Leo thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "My teacher said that when you love something, it listens back." The manager chuckled softly. "Well, I think the piano listened tonight." And so did all of us. The small group of people still in the hall clapped quietly again. Not the loud, wild applause from earlier, but a soft, respectful one that sounded almost like a heartbeat. Mr. Harris turned toward them. "Everyone," he said with a small grin, "I think we just witnessed something the world will talk about for a long time. But let's remember, it wasn't a show. It was a moment." The crowd nodded in agreement. The emotion in the room was thick, beautiful and heavy, like the air after a summer rain. Leo looked at the piano one last time. "Thank you," he whispered to it as if it were alive. The old woman smiled knowingly. "He's thanking the piano," she said quietly, just like his teacher used to. As they began to leave, Mr. Harris gently placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Come back tomorrow," he said warmly. "We'll make sure you get the stage you deserve. No laughter, no doubts, just music." Leo's eyes sparkled. "Really?" "Really," the manager said with a nod. "And next time I'll be the first one clapping." Leo smiled. And in that smile there was light, pure, childlike, and full of gratitude. As they walked out of the grand hall together, the lights dimmed slowly. The echoes of his music still lingered softly in the air, like a promise that would never fade, and somewhere deep in his heart, Leo whispered a thank you to his teacher, to his mother, and to the man who finally saw the truth behind his music, because sometimes It only takes one moment of humility, one sincere kneel, to remind the world what greatness truly looks like. The next morning, the grand hall looked different. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, painting long golden lines across the floor. The air smelled faintly of polish and old wood. It was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred. Leo stood at the doorway holding his mother's hand. She was dressed in her usual cleaning uniform, a soft blue shirt and black trousers, her hair tied neatly behind her head. Her name was Clara. Every morning she came here before the day's rehearsals to tidy the stage and wipe down the instruments. But this morning, something was different. People were already waiting. Mr. Harris, wearing a freshly pressed suit, stood by the piano with a proud smile on his face. A few staff members and even some reporters had gathered, whispering to each other excitedly. When Leo and his mother walked in, heads turned immediately. Clara looked confused. "Mr. Harris?" she asked, holding Leo's shoulder gently. "Is everything all right? I didn't expect anyone here so early." Mr. Harris smiled warmly. "Everything's better than all right, Mrs. Clara," he said. "Actually, we've all been waiting for your son." Clara blinked, puzzled. "My son?" She looked down at Leo. "Did you do something again, sweetheart?" Leo looked up at her shyly, his cheeks turning red. "I played the piano last night, Mom," he said softly. I hope you're not upset." She frowned slightly, not understanding. "You played the piano?" Before he could answer, one of the hall assistants stepped forward. "Not just played," she said, smiling. "He stunned everyone." The whole hall was silent. Even Mr. Harris was speechless. Clara turned toward the manager in disbelief. "Is this true?" Mr. Harris chuckled. "I wish I could say I planned it," he admitted. "But no. He just walked in, asked to play, and, well, he gave us a night we'll never forget." Clara's eyes filled with surprise and pride. She looked at Leo, her hand covering her mouth. "You played here? On this piano?" Leo nodded shyly. "You always said it had the most beautiful sound," he said softly. "I wanted to hear it for myself." Just once, Clara's eyes shimmered. She had worked in that hall for years, but had never been allowed near the stage when the musicians performed. It was her secret dream to hear her son play there someday, but she never imagined it would happen like this. Mr. Harris gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to hear him, Mrs. Clara? The world should see what you've raised." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded slowly. "Yes, please." Leo walked to the piano again. This time the sunlight glowed gently on its surface, like it was waiting just for him. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his posture the way his teacher had taught him, and took a deep breath. His mother stood close, one hand covering her heart. Then Leo began to play. The melody that came out was soft, almost like a whisper. It wasn't loud or showy, it was tender, full of warmth. The notes flowed like sunlight on water, calm and pure. Each key he pressed carried love, gratitude, and the memories of every lesson his teacher had ever given him. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had always known her son had a special connection to music, but hearing it here in the same hall she cleaned every day was beyond her imagination. The boy who once practiced on a broken keyboard in their small apartment was now filling a grand concert hall with life. Mr. Harris stood quietly beside her, his hands behind his back. He had seen many performances, but this one touched him the deepest. It wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. When the final note faded, Leo lifted his fingers and looked at his mother. "Did it sound nice, Mom?" he asked softly. Clara wiped her tears quickly and smiled. "It sounded like home, sweetheart," she whispered. Everyone in the room clapped gently. The sound of their applause was tender, respectful, not wild or noisy, but full of emotion. Then suddenly, a journalist stepped forward with a camera and asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, may I take a photo of your son?" The internet's already calling him the boy maestro. Clara looked startled. "The what?" Mr. Harris chuckled. "It's true. Someone recorded his performance last night and posted it online. It's everywhere now, millions of views. People can't believe how he plays." Leo's eyes widened. "People saw it, like a lot of people?" "Yes, kid," Mr. Harris said, smiling proudly. "And they all loved it." The boy blinked, half amazed, half overwhelmed. "But I wasn't trying to be famous," he said honestly. Mr. Harris crouched beside him. "That's what makes it beautiful, Leo. You didn't try to be anything, you just were. That's why people feel it." Clara knelt beside her son and hugged him tightly. "You see, Leo," she said softly, This is what happens when you follow your heart. The world listens. The reporter lowered her camera for a moment, clearly touched. Would you mind if we share your story? She asked. People should know where this gift came from. Clara looked at Leo, then nodded gently. As long as they know he played for love, not fame. Mr. Harris smiled. Don't worry, Mrs. Clara, we'll make sure they know exactly who he is. Leo looked up at his mother again. Do you think my teacher will see it? Clara smiled through her tears. If he doesn't, I'm sure he'll feel it. Smiled through her tears. If he doesn't, I'm sure he'll feel it. The hall fell silent again for a few seconds. Only the soft hum of the city outside could be heard. And in that silence, something beautiful settled over them. A realization that the world had just discovered something pure, something real, something unpolished but true. Leo hadn't just played a song. He had told a story, his teacher's story, his mother's story, and the story of every dream that begins small but shines brighter than anyone expects. As the morning sun rose higher, its golden light fell across Leo and his mother like a blessing. And for the first time, both of them knew their lives would never be the same again. A few days later, the concert hall looked brighter than ever. It wasn't because of new lights or fresh paint. It was because of the energy that now lived inside it. Since the night Leo played, the hall had become a place of inspiration. People spoke about that moment as if it were magic, something too beautiful to describe in words. New visitors came every day just to see the piano. Some touched its keys softly as if hoping to feel a trace of the boy's music. Others sat quietly, imagining what it must have sounded like when Leo played. And Leo, he was no longer just the boy who asked to play. He had become a symbol of hope. Newspapers wrote about him with headlines like, "The cleaning lady's son who played like a maestro." Video clips of his performance spread across the world, reaching millions of hearts. But for Leo, life hadn't really changed that much. He still woke up early, still practiced every day, and still helped his mother with chores. The only difference was that when he played now, he knew people were listening, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Mr. Harris became one of his biggest supporters. He arranged for Leo to play at a small charity concert the following week. It wasn't a huge event, but it meant everything to Leo. This time, the manager said with a smile, "You'll play as our guest, not as a surprise." When the day of the concert arrived, the hall was packed. Children, families, music teachers, and even a few professional pianists came to watch. There was a soft buzz of excitement as Leo stepped onto the stage. He looked different now, not because of his clothes, but because of his confidence. His head was held high and there was peace in his eyes. Clara sat in the front row, her heart swelling with pride. She still wore her cleaning uniform. She had insisted on sitting that way, saying, "This is who I am, and this is who he is, my son." When Leo sat at the piano, the hall fell silent instantly. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Then, just like before, his fingers began to move. The melody he played that night was new, something he had written himself. It was gentle, full of emotion, and told a story without words. The audience could feel everything in it. The laughter of a child, the love of a mother, the kindness of a teacher, and even the humility of a man who once knelt to apologize. As he played, Leo imagined his teacher, Maestro Johnny, sitting in the front row smiling proudly. He imagined his mother cleaning the stage, humming softly while he practiced in the background. And somewhere deep in his heart he whispered, "This is for you." When he finished, there was silence. Deep, powerful silence. Then came the applause, louder than ever before. People stood up, cheering, crying, clapping until their hands hurt. The sound filled the hall like thunder, but to Leo, it felt like a gentle wave of love. Clara stood too, tears streaming down her face, clapping harder than anyone else. Mr. Harris was beside her, smiling through misty eyes. "You were right, Mrs. Clara," he said softly. "This hall really does have the most beautiful sound, especially when your boy plays." Leo stood up, gave a small bow, and looked at his mother. Their eyes met, and that was enough. They didn't need words. In that single look, they shared everything. Every struggle, every tear, every dream that had brought them here. After the concert, people surrounded him. Some wanted autographs, others just wanted to shake his hand. But Leo stayed humble, smiling shyly at everyone. When a reporter asked him what his secret was, he simply said, "I just play what I feel." My teacher told me music is another way of saying thank you. That line spread almost as fast as his music. Soon, posters appeared across the city for a new series of concerts. The boy maestro, a thank you in every note. But fame never changed Leo. He still visited the hall often, sometimes just to sit quietly and play when no one was around. Mr. Harris would often find him there, lost in the music. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the piano in golden light, Mr. Harris stood by the door watching him play. When Leo finished, the manager said, "You know, Leo, I've worked in this hall for most of my life, but you made it feel alive again." Leo smiled. "It was always alive, sir. It just needed someone to listen." Mr. Harris chuckled softly. "You really are your teacher's student." Leo nodded. "Yes, but I think I'm also my mother's student now. She taught me how to stay kind when the world isn't." Mr. Harris looked at him for a moment, then said warmly, "You'll go far, kid. But no matter how far you go, this hall will always be your home." Leo looked around the room, the piano, the empty seats, the sunlight spilling through the windows, and smiled. "Then I'll always come back," he said simply. And he did. Years later, when Leo grew older and became one of the most loved pianists in the world, he never forgot where it all began. Every year, he returned to the same hall and played one special concert, free for everyone. He called it the Night of Thanks. Before each concert began, he would say the same words. "I once played here as a boy when no one believed in me. But music believed in me, so tonight I play for every dreamer who just needs to be heard." And when his fingers touched the piano, it was as if time stood still again. Just like that first night, the audience would listen, their hearts full, their eyes glistening. And somewhere in the shadows of the hall, Leo always imagined his mother smiling and his teacher whispering, "You did it, maestro." Because the boy who once played in silence had now taught the world how to listen,